Elena stared fixatedly at the Casio watch on her wrist. 9:45 p.m., according to the rigid schedule her strict family had mapped out for her since she was 10. She should have been tucked away in her dorm by now, finishing a chapter on neuroanatomy. Instead, she found herself standing before a peeling oak door, where the scent of fermented barley and the relentless thumping of rock and roll poured out. "Come on, Elle, you're turning into an 80-year-old lady." Skylar, her best friend since high school, teased, giving her shoulder a firm nudge. "It's my birthday, and I swear, if you don't step inside this bar, I'm telling you that you got a secret tattoo." Elena sighed, adjusting her high-collared sweater. "Just one drink, Sky, that's it." Inside, the rusty spoke was dim, thick with the smell of sweat mingled with stale cigarette smoke. Amidst the chaotic crowd, Elena looked like a rabbit lost in a wolf's den. But then, her gaze was pulled toward the far end of the bar. Under the amber neon lights, a man was shaking, a cocktail shaker with unbelievable mastery. He wore a black tank top, revealing artistic tattoos, trailing down his muscular arms clearly more accustomed to tightening car bolts than holding glassware. "That's Jaxson," Skylar whispered, her smile carrying an unreadable edge. "Make yourself at home. I'm going to find the others for a bit." Skylar vanished into the crowd, leaving Elena standing stranded. With no other choice, she stepped toward the bar. Jaxson looked up. He had steel blue eyes, cold and piercing with a hint of defiance. He didn't offer the plastic, commercial smile of a typical server. Instead, he just rested one arm on the wooden countertop, his gaze boring into Elena. "You don't look like the beer-drinking type." Jaxson spoke, his voice as raspy as a high-displacement engine. "A glass of warm milk, perhaps, or maybe some apple juice for the kids." Elena flushed, her pride stinging. "The strongest IPA you have, and I'm a nursing student, not an elementary schooler." Jaxson raised an eyebrow, a half-smirk playing on his lips. He turned, grabbed a glass, and began pouring the deep amber liquid from the tap. "Nursing, huh? So you know how to perform CPR when someone's heart stops, but you don't know how to let yourself relax." He slid the beer toward her. "I'm Jax, and take it from a mechanic turned bartender. You're overheating, sweetheart. Loosen up those shoulders a bit." The conversation that followed flowed with an uncanny naturalness. Jaxson didn't use cheap pickup lines. Instead, he told her about the vintage cars he restored, the rugged beauty of rusted engines, and how Philadelphia looked entirely different from the back of a motorcycle at 3 a.m. His way of speaking was gritty yet authentic, a far cry from the polite, superficial boys her parents usually introduced her to. Under the influence of the beer and Jackson's burning gaze, Elena found herself laughing more than ever. She opened up about the pressure of her clinical shifts and her secret desire to break the rules. When Jackson's hand accidentally brushed against hers, retrieved the glass, a jolt of electricity surged through her, leaving her trembling. She was truly falling for this raw, wild masculinity. However, in a dark corner of the bar, Skylar stood leaning against the wall as her phone vibrated. A message from Jaxson popped up. "The prey has taken the bait. She's cuter than I thought. This bet is as good as one, Sky." Skylar smirked, staring at Elena's back with eyes full of envy. "Enjoy it while it lasts, Elle. Let's see how you resuscitate your own heart when you find out he's just part of the game." The atmosphere at the Rusty Spoke at midnight seemed to shrink, leaving just enough room for two people at the corner of the bar. Elena swirled her glass gently, watching the tiny beer bubbles dissolve. Much like the boundaries and rules she had set for herself were dissolving in front of Jax. "You know, Helena," Jaxson said while wiping down another glass, his movements fluid yet decisive. "Most people come here to forget themselves. But you ... you might be coming here to find yourself." Elena smiled, a subtle grin that carried the sharpness of someone well-read. "Are you trying to psychoanalyze your customers, Jax?" I thought mechanics only cared about things they could touch and tighten with a wrench. Jaxson stopped, leaning forward slightly. Engines are just like people. If you listen closely to the sound of the ignition, you'll know exactly where it's breaking down. And you, Elena, you're running with a rhythm that's a little too perfect. Too perfect is usually a sign of a crack hidden inside. Hay spoke of St. Judas School with lecture halls stifled by the smell of old books. Elena spoke of sleepless nights spent with the periodic table and dry Latin medical terms. She described Skylar's vivacity as a shield she used to stay hidden. The way she chose her words and parried Jackson's jokes revealed an incredibly sharp mind. Yet she always maintained an invisible boundary. Even as the conversation flowed, both were tactful enough not to pry into deeply private matters. She was like a rare book wrapped in a worn-out cover. Only those with enough patience would ever see the golden script inside. For you, Jaxson said, suddenly placing a small, weathered but polished tin can on the counter. Inside was a dark blue velvet ribbon. I found it in an old music box at the shop. It's the exact same color as your eyes. When you're trying to calculate whether or not I'm playing you, do you give gifts to every girl who sits at this bar? Elena asked, her fingers lightly brushing the velvet ribbon. Only the ones who make me stop wiping glasses midway, Jaxson winked. The clock hands ticked steadily toward 3. Italy toward 3, as Elena stepped out of the bar. The Philadelphia chill bit into her lungs, yet an unusual warmth settled in her chest. All the way home, and even as she lay in bed, the scent of sandalwood mixed with a faint trace of gasoline from Jackson's jacket seemed to linger in the air. She closed her eyes, imagining his rough hands touching the ribbon, and a tingling sensation shot down her spine, a feeling no medical textbook could ever explain. The next morning, the alarm clock shrieked like a punishment. Elena woke up with slightly sunken eyes, but an involuntary smile played on her lips. Hey, wake up, sleeping queen. Skylar hammered on the bathroom door. I need a full briefing on last night, right now. On the walk to campus, Skylar chatted incessantly about the atmosphere at the bar and the guys she had brushed past. But every 3 sentences, she'd steer the conversation back to Jaxson. So, what's the deal? Jaxson was watching you the entire time. I've never seen him talk to anyone that long without pouring more drinks. You like him, don't you, Al? Be honest, did your heart go boom boom when he touched your hand? Elena adjusted the strap of her bag, walking leisurely under the canopy of turning maple trees. She could sense the hungry curiosity in her friend's voice. You're exaggerating, Sky. He's a good bartender. And I was just a customer who needed someone to talk to. He's attractive, I'll admit that, but I'm not the type to fall into a trap after just one night. You're a terrible liar, Elle. Skylar narrowed her eyes, her smile turning sharp. I've known you since 6th grade. When you're hiding something, you walk a little faster than usual. And look at you, you're practically sprinting to the lecture hall. Elena halted, trying to regain a steady breathing rhythm. I just don't want to be late for Professor Miller's class. You know how dark he can get. Give it a rest. Is it Professor Miller or that hot mechanic? Skylar laughed loudly, but deep down, a flicker of irritation began to spark. She had introduced Jaxson to Elena with the intent of teasing her. But Elena's discretion and its nothing attitude made Skylar feel like she was being locked out of a secret. I'm off. The acting club has auditions this morning, Skylar said, stopping in front of the main hall. Go ahead and hug your mummies. But remember, don't dream too high. Guys like Jaxson usually don't have room for girls who are always home by midnight. Elena watched Skylar walk away, her heart tightening slightly. She knew Skylar was partly right, but another part of her, the part where the velvet ribbon lay tucked in her pocket, was whispering the opposite. She stepped into the lecture hall and opened her notebook. But instead of charting the circulatory system, her pen unconsciously began sketching the jagged lines of a gear tattoo. Lecture hall for at St. Jude felt more suffocating than usual today. Elena sat in the third row, her pen gliding across the paper as she took notes on the structure of the central nervous system, yet her mind was under siege by thoughts of the night before. Beside her, Skylar was already hurriedly packing her things, even though the lecture had only started 10 minutes ago. She leaned down and whispered into Elena's ear with a tone of mock pity. "I'm heading out, Elle. The drama club audition is way more important than listening to Miller drone on about these nerves. You really should drop this bookworm act for once. And come with me. You've got potential. But this good girl persona is killing you." Elena looked up, her eyes calm but carrying a sharpness that made Skylar falter for a second. "Good luck with the role, Sky. I think I'm better suited to understanding how the brain works than learning how to pretend to be someone else." A flash of envy flickered in Skylar's eyes. She had always hated how Elena used her intelligence to create an invisible barrier, an excellence that Skylar, no matter how hard she acted, could never quite grasp. Skylar gave a cold huff and swept out, leaving Elena alone amidst the dry notes. But the truth was, Elena couldn't focus today. The letters began to dance on the page, and the image of Jaxson with his brass lapel pin surfaced again, reminding her of a different world behind the doors of the bar. That evening, when Skylar invited her back to the Rusty Spoke, Elena spent an entire hour standing before her wardrobe. She hesitated, her fingers brushing against a forest green silk dress, an impulsive vintage find from Rittenhouse Square he had never quite found the courage to wear. "Am I overdoing this?" Elena wondered, catching her reflection. This was a dive bar, not a red carpet. But then she remembered the weight of Jackson's gaze, and a sudden, fierce impulse drove her to shed her usual safety net. When Elena stepped into the dorm's common room, Skylar was busy touching up her powder. She turned around to hurry Elena along, but then she froze. The green silk clung to Elena's silhouette, accentuating her porcelain skin and delicate shoulders. She had pinned her hair up in a loose, effortless bun, revealing a slender neck and a pair of She was no longer the shy nursing student. She looked like a leading lady from a classic French film. Elegant, mysterious, and utterly captivating. You're going out like that," Skylar stammered, her voice pitching up an octave. "I didn't know you had such expensive taste. You look like you're heading to a high society gala. Isn't it a bit much for a mechanics bar?" Elena merely offered a private smile. "You did say I should change things up, didn't you?" The envy in Skylar's heart had now curdled into genuine dread. She had intended for Elena to be the plain backdrop to her own spotlight. But now Elena was the one commanding the room. At the Rusty Spoke, the Rolling Stones were blaring through the speakers, but everything seemed to fall silent the moment Elena walked in. Jaxson was in the middle of pouring a beer for a customer. But as that green shadow drifted past, his hands faltered for a beat. His eyes darkened, a flash of intense and shielded fascination igniting within them. "Hi, Jax," Elena spoke up, her voice soft, yet carrying a newfound confidence. Jaxson set the glass down, slowly wiping his hands on the towel tucked at his hip. He took her in from head to toe, a masculine half-smirk playing on his lips. "Yesterday you were a secret, Elena. Today, you're..." Skylar quickly wedged herself between them, pointedly taking the highest stool to stay at eye level with Jaxson. This time, she had no intention of leaving them any breathing room. "Don't let the look fool you, Jax." Skylar laughed loudly, swatting Jackson's arm playfully. Our Elle probably spent the whole afternoon learning how to be a cool girl. At school, she barely dares to look anyone in the eye. She's always got her face buried in those cadaver anatomy charts. You know, med students tend to have souls that are a bit dry and eccentric. Jaxson cocked an eyebrow, his gaze still anchored on Elena. "I've found that eccentricity usually goes hand in hand with being interesting." Skylar didn't stop. She began rambling about old memories, pointedly weaving in details about how shy Elena used to be, how she was bullied as a kid, and how boring she was without Skylar around to lead the way. Every word out of Skylar's mouth was like a small needle, quietly devaluing Elena in front of Jaxson. Elena just sat there, quietly swirling her glass. She didn't even notice the malice in her best friend's words. She simply thought Skylar was being overexcited or trying to liven up the atmosphere with some long-winded jokes. Jaxson, however, was different. As a man who had kicked around the darkest corners, he found it amusing. He knew Skylar was trying to tear Elena down, but he didn't bother to stop her or protect Elena. On the contrary, he stood there savoring the drama. To him, the ugliness in their friendship only added spice to the bed. Under the counter, Jackson's phone buzzed. A text from Skylar. "Look how pathetic she is now that I've stripped her bare. You still plan on hitting on her?" Jaxson glanced at the screen, then looked up at Elena, who was smiling at him with pure innocence. He smirked, his fingers flying across the keys. "You're taking it a bit too far. Don't mess with our bet." He pocketed the phone and turned to Elena with a look of manufactured affection, completely ignoring Skylar's interference, as if he didn't have a care in the world. "Don't listen to her, Elena," Jaxson said, his voice deep and warm, yet laced with deception. "Whether you're boring or not, it may be the judge of that. I like things that are hard to figure out, and you're a problem I'm determined to solve." Elena blushed, feeling truly special in his eyes, completely unaware that she was standing at the center of an alliance of betrayal. Under the dim, amber glow of the bar, the atmosphere thickened with a calculated silence. Skylar continued her relentless stream of thinly veiled mockery, desperate to strip away Elena's boring facade. But Jaxson was beginning to lose his patience, not out of a desire to protect Elena, but because Skylar's noise was ruining the seductive rhythm he had so painstakingly built. Jaxson lowered his head slightly, the neon lights casting a cold halo over his angular features. He pulled out his phone, his fingers gliding swiftly across the screen. Beneath the bar counter, Skylar's phone vibrated. "Drop it, Sky. You're overdoing it. Don't make me kick you out before the night even starts. Keep it classy. We both know what's good for us." Skylar faltered in the middle of a sentence. She looked at the screen, her heart tightening in a sharp pang of pain. Though the message sounded civil, she knew the ruthless coldness behind it. He had once been her everything, Jaxson and Skylar, the most rebellious couple in the neighborhood. But now she was nothing more than a discarded pawn, forced to watch her ex use his old playbooks to hunt her best friend, driven by a lingering love and a fragile hope for some blurred reconciliation. Skylar closed her eyes and swallowed the bitterness. She raised her beer glass in absolute silence, her eyes burning with a jealous fire as she tracked Elena's every move. Jaxson turned back to Elena, the smile on his lips returning to a state of flawless warmth. "Sorry about that. Your friend gets a bit overenthusiastic sometimes," he said, his voice dropping into a private, confiding tone. "I want to hear more about your nursing internship. You said you're afraid of hurting your patients. I think with hands like these, you're only capable of healing." They talked about night shifts, the fear of failure, and Elena's deep-seated longing to prove herself. Jaxson listened, not missing a single detail. He reached out to wipe a stray drop of beer and liquor from her hand, a gesture so gallant it made Elena feel like the center of the universe. Every question he asked struck a chord with her most secret desires, coaxing her to open up more than ever before. A flutter spread through Elena's chest, a numb, sweet sensation that no textbook had ever prepared her for. Tea was nearly 3 a.m., and the bar was sparse. Before Elena left, Jaxson pulled a small ebony box from beneath the counter, exquisitely carved with a wild rose. "This was a custom piece from a silversmith I know. It's too pure to sit in a greasy workshop like this. I think it belongs to you." He opened the box, lifting out a delicate silver necklace with an amethyst pendant. As he stepped closer to place it in her hand, his rough, calloused fingers deliberately lingered, brushing slowly across Elena's soft palm. A jolt of electricity surged through her, making her shiver. She looked up, catching the profound depth in Jaxson's gaze. He didn't hurry to let go. Instead, he let his thumb graze the back of her hand for a few heartbeats before pulling away. He probably didn't mean it, Elena told herself, her heart racing. But that accident was enough to leave her breathless. Back at their shared apartment, the tension between the two girls was thick enough to cut with a knife. Skylar didn't say a word, her face swollen with suppressed emotion. She kicked her heels into the corner and collapsed onto the bed, still wearing her smoke-scented bar clothes and smudged makeup. Envy and frustration had stripped her of any desire to care about anything, least of all herself. Skylar squeezed her eyes shut, her breathing heavy as she drifted into a bitter sleep. In stark contrast to her friend's disarray, Elena moved slowly into the bathroom. She stepped out of the forest green silk dress, hanging it up with tender care. She took the time to thoroughly cleanse her face, applying a light layer of moisturizer and brushing her hair. This meticulousness wasn't just a habit. It was a way of honoring the feeling of being cherished like a lady. Once tucked under her warm duvet, sleep eluded her. She stared at the ceiling, her chest still heaving. The image of Jaxson, the slight grit of his fingers against her skin, and that signature scent of sandalwood and musk haunted her thoughts. She lay there, wide awake for an hour, lost in fantasies of a fated love, entirely unaware that in the room next door, betrayal was quietly fermenting. The morning Philadelphia sun filtered through the blinds, not with brilliance, but with the gray hue of an approaching storm. In the shared apartment, the air was so dense that Elena felt as if her chest were being constricted. Skylar was no longer the fiery heart she usually was. She moved around the room like a vengeful ghost. The rasp of suitcase zippers and the thud of shoes on the hardwood floor carried a sharp, jagged edge that glared against Elena's eardrums. Do you want some cereal this morning? Elena spoke softly, her voice so fragile it seemed a single heavy breath could shatter their friendship. Skylar didn't turn around, only casting a frostbitten look through the mirror. No, I have rehearsals at the drama club, Miller's class. I'm skipping it, acting is my life. Elena, not some corpses in your lab. The door slammed shut, bang. That sound acted like a definitive period. At the end of a conversation Elena hadn't even begun. She stood frozen in the middle of the room, still clutching a porcelain spoon. An invisible sense of guilt rose up, seeping into her very bones. Why did she feel responsible? In Elena's world, Skylar had always been the sun, while she was merely a tiny planet orbiting in her wake. The sun suddenly going dark left her utterly directionless. Elena trudged along the path leading to the St. Jude lecture halls. The autumn wind whipped through her thin jacket, but the external chill was nothing compared to the void beside her. In the past, every step of this walk had been filled with Skylar's chatter. Skylar would talk about the man she just met or a movie she'd seen, and Elena would simply listen, feeling shielded beneath her friend's radiant shadow. But now, walking alone, Elena suddenly realized how terrifyingly small she felt. Other students brushed past her in pairs or groups, their laughter echoing through the corridors. Elena withdrew into herself, hugging her bag against her chest like a shield. She felt like 10-year-old Elena all over again, a lonely bookworm who always sat in the dimmest corner of the library, the girl who didn't know how to start a conversation and lived in fear of being noticed. This solitude wasn't peace. It was a kind of pressure that made it hard to breathe. Solitude is like a chronic illness, Elena thought. It lingers in your blood, just waiting for your weakest moment to flare up. She pulled out her phone, her thumb hovering hesitantly over the screen. 9:15 a.m. Elena, are you at the club yet? You seemed tired earlier. If rehearsal ends early. Want to grab lunch at our usual spot, my treat. Sent 1 second, 10 seconds. Then 5 minutes passed. No sign of a reply, not even a typing ... bubble. She must be busy with the audition. Elena told herself. Sky is always serious about the stage. But deep down, another voice whispered, she's not busy. She just doesn't want to answer you. Elena entered the lecture hall and took her usual seat. The chair beside her, where Skylar usually napped or doodled on her notebooks, was now achingly empty. She opened her journal, pen resting on the pristine white paper. But instead of writing the lesson title, she found herself tracing aimless, wandering lines. The final class ended with a silent sigh. Elena stood amidst the rush of people pouring out of the hall, her hand gripping the phone, which remained as silent as a pebble. No reply, no playful icon from Skylar. Normally, at this hour, Skylar would pounce on her, throw an arm around her shoulder, and drag her into some wild plan. A new ice cream shop, a vintage store, or simply sitting on the grass to gossip about the guys on campus. Skylar was the driver of Elena's joy. Without that frenzy, Elena felt like a stray in her own familiar school. A strange emptiness took hold of her, a mix of irritation and restlessness. In her cluttered mind, she suddenly thought of Jaxson. They seemed so close, perhaps he knew something about Skylar's sudden shift, even though she knew the rusty spoke wouldn't. Be open at midday, Elena found herself. Unconsciously walking towards South Street. She wanted to see the place in the daylight. The place where, just last night, everything had felt like a shimmering mirage.